Hey everyone, this is Ryan with From Corners Unknown. I hope you're all doing well. A few weeks ago, I was fortunate to have a conversation with Joe of OldeBlock Records, a relatively nascent noise ambient experimental label based in Canada. This is kind of untreaded territory for me speaking with a record label owner, but it was a really fun and engaging conversation to talk with Joe about how he views his label as not so much just a record label, but a collective of musicians, and where he's going to be planning to take that in the years ahead. There's a lot of interesting things he has to say about the digital landscape and how it affects, discovering music and kind of just the dynamic of music discovery in today's day and age. So I hope you enjoy the conversation between Joe and I. And to bookend this conversation, I'm going to play a couple tracks from his personal project, Woony Hacks, as well as try and embed a couple of his tracks throughout our conversation. So thank you so much for your continued support, and thank you so much for any support you can give to Joe and OldeBlock Records. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me, man.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, so you founded, or you are the founder of, I may pronounce this wrong, but OldeBlock Records?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when did you find that record label? When did you find it?
It was just part of seeing how much output was out there for the type of music that I wanted to represent, I guess.
Okay.
And it kind of in the back of my mind. So the label itself is, as you may know, is still in its infancy. It's been around, I guess, officially, I would say, for just over a year now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
The website was initially just a skeleton, and then finally we got to the point of getting these few releases out.
Okay.
And I'd say about a year now.
And when you say we, do you have some other folks running the label with you?
Well, no, it's pretty much myself now, but I always say we because I treat it as a collective.
Gotcha.
My relationships with the artists that are on there. So there's two that have releases now, and we have two more coming in the new year.
Oh, awesome.
Just because we were holding off because of Christmas. Is just a horrible time to release music. So we said we wait, but we have two more coming. And yeah, the relationship is like a collective. I try to have the artists engage with each other in conversation. Often solitary people and focused on their work, but to me that's something that I value and that I want to see going along. So the first release that I have planned for this summer is going to be actual vinyl work that is going to feature all the artists that we have up to date on the label, kind of working together on a common concept or theme. So we're just working on that now.
That sounds great. And so pardon me for not knowing this, I feel like I should, but do you produce music yourself, or have you dabbled in it?
I do. So so I'm actually the artist Woony Hacks on the label.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's my work. I started getting into I've always kind of been into synthesizer stuff. 2 years ago, I would say, I started building modular synthesizers.
Oh, cool.
And so one of the natural occurrences of building modular synthesizers when you have absolutely no idea what you're doing, running a modular synth, is you start to make noise or just kind of droney stuff because you're still learning how to patch things together and control everything. And so it was a natural progression for me. I had heard other artists that were doing it, a couple Canadian artists that were doing this kind of similar stuff, and really inspired me to actually dig deeper into it. So that's where the work from the Woony Hacks name comes from. And
I see. And is the work that you have as under the guys Woony Hacks, is that all the stuff you've produced is just on the OldeBlock records, or do you have other material that never made it on to?
My background is actually, I've been in music for quite some time. So I started playing guitar at the age of 12.
Oh, wow.
And just kind of being inspired by my dad. He was actually an avid music listener and exposed me to a lot of really cool, he had like the first Kraftwerk records in the 70s, and listened to Hendrix and Pink Floyd and all this awesome stuff.
Yeah.
So I picked up a guitar at the age of 12 and played in bands. That was kind of a weird thing because I grew up in a really small town.
Where'd you grow up? I don't know anything about Canada.
So it was a northern town in Canada called Bonnyville. So fairly isolated oil field town. A lot of rednecks and kind of a backwoods area. But for some odd reason, in my high school, we had an entire set where there was at least, I would say, 20 to 30 of us who all played together. We formed bands. We were really lucky enough to have a couple teachers that were really forward-thinking and would set up shows for us and all that kind of thing. So excuse me. So in those bands, I would do demo tapes. Eventually, as I got older and decided to move away, I did move to one of the bigger centers, Vancouver, with a band, and we did CDs and stuff like that. Often what happens with people who play in bands, bands break up, people get married, they get girlfriends, stuff happens. Sure. This is like I'm hoping there are at least a few musicians out there that can relate to that kind of commentary. Yeah. And so I just I shelled up for a while, and I got into synthesizers and kind of moved on with my life musically, and so this newest stuff is kind of the product of me just kind of actually shelling up a little bit and doing a bit of more introspective work musically.
I see. Yeah. And how old were you when you did that transition, or you started going from it?
It was pretty gradual because like most people, you kind of follow what's happening in the overall picture of music and the time. So, my early forays into electronic music was kind of techno-y stuff, and I was buying hardware synths and working with MIDI and stuff like that, and it was really cumbersome. And, and I enjoyed it, but it wasn't totally fulfilling for me. I've always been more into the kind of weirder side of things, and so eventually it morphed with the gear, I guess. So I started getting rid of this gear and stuff like that. So it's been really quite a long progression. More dramatically in the last 5 years for sure.
I see. And do you do live performances, or have you done like as Woony Hacks and things of that sort?
Yeah. So I currently live in a city called Edmonton, the city of Edmonton, and we have a small community of artists here that do noise performances. Oh, cool. Sometimes it's a straight noise night, and there's a fellow here called Gamache who kind of organizes these shows, and it's a really tight community. There's always people there showing up, and it ranges from those like straight up noise, really simple setups, to more elaborate stuff, guys who are doing ambient work or experimental kind of glitch stuff. So it just depends on the night. But I try to show up to those when I can once in a while, and
interesting.
Do that.
Huh. Mm-hmm. So when you founded OldeBlock, were you trying to or when you founded it, was there a niche or a certain corner of the music scene you thought in like your local area, or in general you didn't see like getting filled with this kind of experimental noise stuff? Like what was the reason for like founding it?
Yeah, I think one of my kind of an impetus, I guess, if that's what you're asking for,
Yeah.
is actually more in diversity, because I feel like we can assign labels like noise and harsh noise and ambient, dark ambient
Sure.
to these really specific genres, and I think that is a trend to have these kind of journalistic conveniences, be
Yeah.
really specific, and this is what we do, and we're really special at this. And I kind of don't want to do that. I kind of want to have a bit of diversity and show people different angles of the music, because I feel like, as a record label owner, I want to be a bit of a curator.
Yeah.
I want to open people up to different things, and also not close myself into to just kind of one idea or one
Sure.
vein. So yeah, but besides that, it's definitely about exploration. I really like guys who or at least have the intention of pushing their art
I see.
a little bit. So,
I see.
a guy like Sense Delete on the label, you can
Yeah.
hear a difference between even just his two releases, that he's progressing, in a certain direction. That there's something happening new every time. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, no, and I definitely get that vibe when I listen to, each of the respective releases, and I listen to Sense Lead. I was pretty blown away by just like the diversity on display in the sounds, kind of the ambient, and then there were more like some of the more beat laden passages and such. But how'd you get in contact or find Sense Delete?
Yeah, I did an initial call just over the internet on Reddit, saying that I'd like to get some people involved, and I was actually flooded with responses. I
Hmm.
must have had at least 50 people drop stuff,
Jeez.
and but I very through a lot of it, because there were a lot of guys who just weren't there yet. That I felt musically,
I see.
and then and then you start to have conversations with people, and you find out, what do they expect from you? What do you expect from them? And what are their motivations, and are they motivated at all to really
Yeah.
pursue this? Because doing music is hard, because it's a highly personal thing,
Yeah.
and art it's just a fickle beast. So the people who have ended up on the label to this point are just they're I guess they're just solid guys who are passionate about what they do, and they're also responsive to me, because I have to be at least a little bit in control of what gets put out there, because I want to do quality work. I would like my artists to do quality work as
Yeah.
well. So, and that's something that you can't do it overnight. It's something you progress at. So.
Sure. Sure. And how about and did you meet the other artist that I saw, James Parrott, I believe? Did you meet him through your Reddit your call or your message?
James is actually a local guy here. So we talked about the shows that we do here in the Edmonton area. So I actually met James at one of our shows.
Oh, cool.
James is a straight up drone guy.
Yeah.
So he, but I chose to bring him on because he's just very good at that. He when you get into drone music, it's one of those things that's it's subjective.
Yeah.
It has a lot of different angles to it, but he's almost like a surgeon. He will go in there. He understands that in drone music you have effects like binaural beating, where you're using phase canceling in your sound. He's really intentional in how that affects what you're hearing and what you're experiencing. So I really like that aspect, that he's got some depth there, and that he wants to give the listeners an experience. So I'm looking forward to have a couple more pieces come up with him. And he's very prolific in what he does. So pretty sure what I select to put on from him, because his output is really great. Um, so the one track he has on there is like this 30-minute
Yeah.
epic drone,
Yeah.
and it really requires some attention to fully appreciate it, because it's actually a really long progression.
Yeah.
I think, to me, that's part of the progress of ambient music. Is, Brian Eno said, his one of his early thoughts on ambient music is that you can either pay attention to it or ignore it.
Yeah.
But I think that concept is shifting a bit with ambient music, where fans and listeners of ambient music want to pay attention, because the experience is, there's a reward in that experience of when you really sit down, excuse me, when you really sit down with a piece of music and explore it. When you do some deep listening, there's definitely rewards there in ambient music, and I think that is a shift that is happening, and why it's becoming, it's becoming a thing. People really appreciate what that can offer, either just on a general experience level, or even on a spiritual level. So.
Yeah. And do you in your local area? I know you said you have a cluster of artists that do shows like this, but how from your perspective as a label owner, how have you seen the landscape? Like, are you finding more and more people are getting into drone music? Because I whenever I speak with folks, I seldom meet many that really listen to dark ambient or know what it is per se, or just drone music in general. But from your perspective, have you seen like any trend upward in interest or?
I don't think from the local scene here, it's actually very difficult, because in Canada, we have a very low population density.
I see.
So even our cities are small. We don't have a big, the big urban sprawls. So shows can be, on a day like today, where it's let's see, here in the States, so it's minus 22 Fahrenheit. It's pretty tough.
It's that cold?
pretty.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, it's that cold today. Yeah,
my
it's crazy.
God.
So just to get out of the house and go to a show, if someone was having a show today, people wouldn't be very motivated.
No.
But so it's small, and it grows by word of mouth, which like anything is actually the best way to grow, because there's a certain level of sincerity that comes with that. Like, hey man, these guys are putting on these shows, and I think you would like this music. Come out one night, and
Sure.
A new person shows up to the shows. So
yeah. How does the word of mouth contrast with the digital landscape? Because I know that the digital landscape has been getting, it's inundated with, there's just so much out there, and it's kind of, I would say, in a sense, it's, from my perspective, it's sometimes a chore just to be able to find some of the good stuff. Like, you have to spend more and more time trying to unearth those gems. But as a label owner, how is that, digital versus word of mouth?
You're hitting the nail on the head with the whole search thing, and I know you've heard me use the expression that it's brought crate digging to a whole new level.
That is true.
Back in the day, it was like, go to the record store and you try and dig for something cool out of whatever was there, records. Yep. Now the internet, you literally have millions of releases out there to dig through. What's good, what's not good, and that kind of level of inundation is kind of desensitizes you to music a little bit. It's like flicking channels on television and just seeing commercials. Well, eventually you're just gonna, by default, you're just gonna keep flicking those channels and might even miss something great. So then it becomes a different kind of labor of just being patient, finding where the passion is, finding the people that are doing quality stuff, and then the beautiful thing about the web is that interconnectivity. When you find someone who's doing something you like, usually you can branch off of what they're doing and kind of you find stuff that's really well related to that. So there is a benefit in that we still have connections on the internet, and that's one of the strengths of it. So
I see. And has it even since you've just started pushing out some releases from the couple artists you have on your label, how has it been for you, doing the digital platform? Has it posed any unique challenges you really didn't expect at the outset?
I mean, I'm running into the same challenges that anyone else doing digital does. Is you're putting your music out into the ocean, and so how do you get people to pay attention to you,
Yeah,
to come and see where you're at, and really give you a listen? So, and you try to improve that by having conversations with people,
I
by
see.
going on boards, and just letting people know you're out there. And of course, you can't force people
Yeah,
to listen to you.
I see.
The least successful guys are the ones that go out there and say, "Hey, here's my new record. Listen to it."
Yeah.
And everyone goes, "F you! I don't want to listen to you." so that's a challenge for sure. And you can try advertising and all that, and that kind of, for some people, that gives a negative slant to what you're doing. If
Yeah,
you're doing this underground, and there, let's face it, there is no underground, but we still have this kind of association to this music is special. It's a niche culture, and so I don't think there's anything wrong with still treating it that way a little bit.
I see. So since founding the label, how has, I guess, from the perspective of, we've already discussed a bit about the artists, and you're going to be releasing a couple new releases from artists next year. But how's the label evolved from its inception to now?
Well, because we're talking about a short time span, I think the evolution is just in my own. I guess what my preconceptions were of what a label is, and what it's becoming, which is really, I just want it to be a collective of good art,
Sure.
a good sound, and if I can accomplish that and get into the world of physical releases and create something tangible out of that, then I think that's a good first step, and that's kind of the direction we're going to follow. So,
Sure.
yeah.
And did you so this is have you worked for a label, or did you have any idea as to what you were getting yourself into before you founded this, or is this kind of you just kind of jumped off in the deep end?
Yeah, I just kind of jumped off. I mean,
Okay.
I do have a background in so I have a diploma in digital arts and media.
Oh, cool.
I've worked in music, like I said, I've released physical formats in the past in bands and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I did have my feet wet a little bit and understand a bit of the mechanics. But of course, the mechanics are really changing with streaming services, and
Yeah.
it's been actually very much a detriment to the artists because of YouTube laws and things like that. It basically stems from an abuse of a law that happened via YouTube, which is, as we know, with YouTube, there was a lot of abuse of copyright
Yeah.
or music. People just throw stuff on their videos or use a picture off the internet to represent, the video, or stuff like all kinds of stuff like that is happening. And so they created this law that states that if you do such a thing, the copyright owner will notice and object to it. The person who released the material has the right to simply remove it, and they don't have to pay any fees. They don't have to,
I see.
there's no repercussions to that. You just remove the work.
I see.
And so, music streaming services are using this law in the same manner, where they are releasing releases within the pool of stuff that's been submitted and whatnot, not paying it out because simply because of that law, they wouldn't have to do anything until they're told to remove the media, which is in my opinion, obviously an abuse.
Yeah.
And so there are organizations that are lobbying to change what's happening, and there's progress happening there. But in the meantime, a lot of the little guys are just not seeing a lot of revenue. So that's why Bandcamp is great, because
Yeah.
you know what's happening, you know what you're getting when somebody supports you, and so I leave all those venues open for the artists that release with me. I just use everything uh, that we can, and so people have a choice at least.
I see.
Yeah, and that's one of the incentives of working with physical mediums. Obviously, people like to have something tangible in their
Yeah.
hands. Nice. There's the love of vinyl, the love of tapes and whatnot,
Sure.
and then the revenue comes straight to you as well. So that's obviously a direction we're going to move in as well. So
I guess we already touched on it a little bit with respect to, some of the kind of the the landscape of the web, but since you since you jumped into this, just kind of into the deep end and finding a record label, what kind of unique challenges have been posed to you that you really didn't anticipate?
one of them actually, which is you wouldn't think of, is I'm still working on developing relationships with actual visual artists. Because obviously, you when you're putting out records, you want to have nice artwork,
Yeah.
and that's something that I think the label can obviously grow and improve on. But
Sure.
it's almost an entirely separate community sometimes. So I find myself going out and trolling on art websites and stuff like that, just trying to build relationships with visual artists because I'd like to have that. Especially when it comes to our vinyl release in the summer here, I am planning to have something really awesome. I want it to look great.
Yeah.
So that's one thing is, when you're on a shoestring budget, you want to be able to pay people for their art and find artists that you can that relate to what you're doing. And, so it's relationship building. It's challenging, but it's also fun. So
I see.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
I guess since we're on that note of the artwork for the Woony Hacks and some of the other releases, they seem relatively consistent in who did it. I could be wrong on that, but is that your own work or is that somebody else's?
Well, the notes are done by me. The actual images for the artists themselves were selected by the artists.
I see.
So the Winnie Hacks work did my own work, and you may have noticed that I just put a banner on every release.
That's
and
right.
so I just do that to when you get a release from the label, it's ours because it has
Of course.
the same banner on it. It won't be like that for the physical releases, but in the digital world, it's just a way to identify what you're doing. So
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
So since you founded it and through the process, I know it's still a relatively short time frame we're talking about here, but what have you? So we've talked a bit about the challenges, but what have you learned so far? In like establishing a label and trying to communicate with artists and build relationships.
You have to be sensitive to the way other people are and the way they work and what their workflow is. You can have a guy that can literally be churning out song after song, week after week, and it gets to a point where you have to tell them, "Listen, man, it's like I don't want 20 songs. I want one really good track."
Yeah.
And then on the opposite side of the spectrum, you could have another guy who would, he would take a month. He will do that one track that he's poured his heart and soul into it, and you still have to tell them, okay, can you maybe change this a little bit? And they may be a little bit defensive.
Yeah.
And so the challenges are always always about relationships and communicating with people and understanding people's workflows and their ethics, their work ethics, and what they're willing to do and willing not to do. And initially, when I had started the label and I did the first call, there were actually about 3 or 4 people artists who ended up dropping out because they just weren't willing to adapt to demands, whether they were big, on my part, whether they were big demands or really small, simple demands. They were just like, listen, man, this is what I'm doing, and I can't change because it's my thing and it's special to me. And I totally understood that and said, you move on from that. So it becomes, when you have like work methods, like workflows, or even just being professional and flexible, those are things that I value with the people that I work with, and that I try to work on myself. So because as a label owner, I have to be on a path of continual improvement as well. So.
Sure. And what are, I guess this is going to stem from my own, because I don't produce any music, and I'm like an active listener, but I don't produce much. But when you say, you give artists certain demands, or some of them are like what kind of relationship, like what are you communicating with artists about, like with respect to improving, like how, like I can't even ask the question. I feel like I'm completely missing, like I just don't have the vernacular to ask it correctly, but like when you listen to an artist's song, like how do you go about knowing which parts to fix, and how are you trying to like shape it into, the larger tapestry of OldeBlock Records?
Well, for me, it's actually it ends up being a lot of really practical stuff.
Okay.
Because once I've decided on an artist that I say, hey man, I want, or whomever, I would like you to work with me. So by the time that I have asked an artist to join the label or do some work for me, I already know that their output or the work that they're doing is already meeting kind of my taste, I suppose.
Sure.
So it becomes a matter of practical issues. Maybe it has something to do with how the mastering is, because there's a lot of audio specifications you have to meet in order to, when you're streaming on all these services, or if you're going to do a piece of vinyl, you have to meet certain specs. Or if somebody is doing, something that's really on the noise spectrum, you don't want to be, I guess it's an aesthetic thing, but you don't want to be literally damaging someone's ears.
Yeah.
So if I have to tell a guy, what, we're going to roll off at 30 hertz just to get rid of the really, really low end, so we're not damaging someone's speakers, most people aren't going to argue that that's
Sure.
that's damaging to their artistic vision.
Yeah.
So it's often stuff like that,
Okay.
or sometimes the piece just, sometimes a piece just doesn't work. Or it just doesn't. The guideline that I offer artists often is, and I think this is really relevant to being an artist in any vein, is can you take your work and listen to it over and over again? Can you sit down with the output that you've made and just put it on, play it over and over, and feel good about it? Are you satisfied with it? And so often I'll come back with that when an artist gives me a piece, and or maybe they'll give me two, and one of them is like a mind blower. You're just like, yeah, that's great. And the other one, well, maybe not so much. And I'll say, listen, can you listen to this 100 times?
Sure.
So it's just one of those things, because some artists can be very prolific, and so you have to be a bit choosy. Yeah.
Okay. Could you describe a bit? I know it could be sometimes difficult to describe tastes, and maybe it's, I'm not as well versed in the spectrum of noise as many other folks, but your personal tastes and preferences, in the realm of noise and experimental music.
Sure. I mean, as I mentioned before, I grew up on rock and roll and krautrock and psychedelic rock, and so my musical tastes really are very far ranging.
Sure.
And I think most people's are. So, but in the realm of what we're talking about, dark ambient music or noise or whatever, I like work that has density.
Okay.
One of my favorite artists that I could name is Tim Hecker,
Okay.
who's another Canadian artist, and
Okay.
he does this very dense pastoral, almost pastoral work. It sounds like you're listening to church music, but it's noise. So
Interesting.
that stuff that has multiple layers and potential for some really deep listening experiences, like that's this kind of stuff that I dig. Yeah,
Okay.
for sure.
And that's on like the literal noise level as well as kind of the emotional or like the introspective sound.
Yeah. I think, to me, some people listen to noise for the cathartic experience. That's the beauty of that art, is that it's an individualistic thing. You can have 10 people in a room listening to noise, and everyone's going to have a different experience relating to it, whether it's an oral experience or spiritual or even physical, right?
Sure.
You go to a really loud noise show and you're going to feel that in your body, and it's going to do something to you, and that's kind of the beauty of it. So, but for me, I like stuff that has, can give you kind of psychic shifts as you're listening to it, and has movement and different perceptual layers, I guess, is one way to put it.
Sure. And what do you, with respect to, I guess, your own work as well as the artists you have on OldeBlock Records, is there, like, what do you want folks to take away from the music that you have on display when they listen to it, emotionally or like, just what do you want folks to really to take away from it?
Well, if in any capacity, if it's a pleasant experience for them, if it gives them a bit of a vibe of an insight, I think one of the comments recently that I received on the Sense Delete latest releases, somebody said, "Yeah, this is reminds me of really old school and industrial." And the guy posted me this link to this really kind of obscure early, I think it was a 1970s ambient album that I had never heard before. I mean, that's a wonderful thing, where someone has a reaction and says, "Hey man, this reminds you of this, check this out."
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're having a conversation with someone. And
Sure.
If I can do that with every release, then that's a cool thing for me to that gives me satisfaction that I know I'm doing something right. So
Sure.
yeah.
Who was that? What was that album? Just because I'm always curious about obscure stuff.
Sure. Yeah, let me look it up.
Yeah, no.
I'll have to bring it up. Yeah. I have, I'm one of those people that has so much music that I never remember names and titles.
Of course. No, I'm in the same boat as you, for sure.
So the album is The Bridge.
The Bridge, okay.
The Bridge, and it's by Robert Rental.
Huh.
And other artist, I'm just getting his name. Robert Rental and Thomas Lear.
Okay. And it's The Bridge?
Yeah, it was way ahead of its time, so it's a pretty cool release. Yeah.
And we're okay. No, interesting. I'll have to go check that out. That sounds really cool. I'm curious about your, I don't know how to ask this the right way, but what are some like your earliest memories, or some of the like, was there a moment or kind of like an epiphany for you when you just listened to noise music or an experimental artist and it really just clicked with you? Like, what are some of like your earliest memories with when it really kind of sunk in and you really you wanted to do that?
I think that from the very first would be probably late 80s, early 90s. I really got into a band called Skinny Puppy. And they're not a noise act per se, but they definitely have those elements in their music where the electronics, I think they were calling it brap at that time. Brap was like this pure electronic experimentation, and they really pushed the limits of that to where it was noise, right? It was just this electronic chaos. And I really thought that that blew my mind. I thought that was awesome. And further along the line, I would have got more into ambient work. So, things like Brian Eno.
Yeah.
Brian Eno's work. I mean, everybody says Brian Eno because, he's just the man.
Yeah.
But if specifically to noise, it would be Tim Hecker's work for sure.
Okay.
I had listened to his album Mirages, and kind of reminds me of just like a lot of that work is it's almost like they're almost like meditations.
Sure.
These pieces of work where you're hearing the sound of the collective subconscious of the world being expressed in music.
Yeah.
To me, it's just like this. Anyone who's a deep listener of music and art will, if they take the time to listen to these forms, I think they'll find that. I think they'll realize that there's a lot to be experienced there.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you did note you're gonna have your cobbling together your vinyl release for next summer, but do you have any longer term goals for the record label, or are you just focusing one step at a time, or do you have any larger things you're hoping to do over the next couple of years or few years?
Yeah, I think after, obviously the first intent and is to start developing some income, and my intent to do with that is to start showcasing the artists, whether it's a trip to a little conference, do a live showcase or something like that. So that's kind of would be the next step once we establish some physical releases and build a bit of a fan base. Then and naturally that's where I want the money to go is to just keep the ball rolling and give these guys a chance to have some exposure and meet each other and get out more in the world. So
definitely. And how the heck do you founded this, and you have a family and you have a full-time job outside of this, right? So how the heck do you balance all this?
Yeah, it's crazy, man. I don't know. Now that my family's getting a bit older, I mean, my children are getting a bit older, so it's going to afford me an opportunity to slow down on. I'm trying to shift over more and more into doing my creative work because it's really what it's what I value. It's really a challenge for people who are in music and in art to balance life and art, or to make a living doing art. It's always a challenge. So, but I think I'm at a point in my life where I can manage it, and it's going to be it's just like anything, slow baby steps. I treat the label the same way, slow baby steps, and then you don't get too stressed out about everything.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, as a parting question for the conversation, I usually ask folks, what are maybe 2 or 3 artists or records or maybe even labels in this case you discovered this year that you recommend folks to go check out? I mean, are there some artists that really blew you away that you think people should get into or listen to?
Sure. Yeah, one of them is actually one of my old bandmates. So in my first band, I played in this, we were kind of like a goth prog band. We were big into Rush was one of our big influences, but of course we like the dark stuff. And the singer from that group became a project called Wold.
Okay.
And he's fairly well renowned in noise circles because his work is fairly groundbreaking.
And how do you spell that?
WOLD.
WOLD. Okay.
Yeah, and so it's if you like your noise music intense and disturbing, he's your guy.
Sure.
Other than that, the label, I think one of the labels he's associated with is called Profound Lore.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, they do wonderful stuff, and they've got a huge base of releases now that you can just spend a lot of time digging into their stuff.
A lot of time, and I've given them a good chunk of change over the last few months, honestly.
Yeah, it's a great label for sure.
Yeah.
So that's one of them. One of the releases that obviously Mertzbo. and he did a split with Alessandro Cortini, who is a big modular synth guy.
Huh.
I was a fan of Alessandro's work because he's actually he's a master synth dude. I think he was the synth guy for Nine Inch Nails.
Oh wow!
So he's really kind of prolific in the synth realm, and then he ended up doing a split with Merzbow, which is just it's fantastic. So I would check that guy out, and I've been listening to a lot of for a third one, Boris.
Boris.
They're just
Yeah.
they're they're dark and they're deep and they're intense.
Yeah. No,
they're cool.
Yeah, I just experienced them for the first time live just a few months ago. Here
Oh,
in
that's
UG.
awesome.
Yeah, it was fantastic, and I saw them with Endon, and they're really great. Another like Japanese noise band, really good stuff.
Cool.
Cool. Well, yeah, man. Thank you very much for thank you very much for taking the time to speak with me about this.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks a lot, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.